Well, it is Mark Rowan, and welcome to the 2000 Cubit Rule. And we're always having an amazing conversation with people that God's using in all different types of places and positions. And today we're going to have another one of those conversations. Just wanted to remind you before we jump into today's conversation that SheepFeast and our platform, the Farm Work, is here to help make disciples through technology. So we're looking to partner up with businesses that want to streamline their technology and just do that better. So if that's you, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. But more on that, check out sheepfeast.com. But today we are delighted to have a special guest, Gerhard Swart, and you'll notice the accent on him. He's originally from South Africa. He's going to be talking about an amazing project he was involved with the first electric car in the country of South Africa. And welcome, Gerhard. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Mark. And it's great to be on your podcast. Really looking forward to it.
Yes, and your name is spelled for those that are maybe tuning in and seeing it. Some of us might think it's Gerhard or Gerhard, or there's a lot of different ways to potentially do it. How do you say it in South Africa?
Gerhard.
Gerhard.
Yeah,
That's even next
so
level.
it's a
Yeah.
guttural G, almost like the Scottish loch,
Yeah.
similar pronunciation.
Excellent. Well, now we're all educated into that. And speaking of education, you've had a lot of it through the years to be able to do what you do. You do have an engineering background to give a little bit more understanding to people. I'll let you talk about a little bit your background, and you're currently working at actually at an observatory, correct?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Kind of give us a little bit of story of who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Zimbabwe, what was then called Rhodesia. And due to the sanctions against the country, it was hard to actually farm and maintain your farming equipment. And my father was somewhat of an inventor that managed to keep things going. He actually modified his planters and his plows and everything to make them, work and do more things than they were designed for originally. And it was really wonderful growing up in that environment. A lot of freedom. My parents were both really loving God and teaching us, how to love Him in return. Um, and at quite a young age, I already started enjoying playing with electronics. So at junior school, I had a little suitcase, and I was shocking my mates with some gadgets that I'd put together. And then at high school, I had a science teacher that was absolutely amazing, and he started an electronics club along with a science club and a photography club, and I was in all three of those clubs. There my interest started in anything technical. And if you ask me what I wanted to become, it was an engineer. And when I left school, teachers give you advice, and some said I should become a pastor. Uh, the one teacher told me I need to become a microbiologist because I was doing quite well in biology. But my heart was set on engineering, and I was good with physics and chemistry and those subjects. So I then studied electronic engineering. Started off working in a brewery of all places, because they gave me a scholarship to study, and then went on to work in the defense industry, working on really big complex projects, in particular helicopter related weapon systems, and integrating them into aircraft. And then moving on to work on South Africa's first locally developed optical telescope, which was based on the Hobby Eberly telescope in Texas, Fort Davis, Texas. And so we, got some of the ideas from that crowd, and then refined them to build a next generation of what was then the largest telescope in the Southern Hemisphere. So a really big optical telescope with several international partners, including some from the United States. At the end of that project, that's when we said to each other, what next? And, that's where we ended up with this electric vehicle project. Um, but, it is a project that ended, and that's largely what I think the crux of the story may be. But afterwards, I ended up in working with lithium-ion battery storage systems. And when that didn't quite work out, the business didn't quite work out the way I intended, I saw this wonderful opportunity to go back into astronomical instruments here in the UK. And, that's really where I've been working for the last 8 years in an observatory, building the largest radio telescope in the world at the moment.
Oh, just simple things, right? We all done those kind of things. It's great to
Yeah,
hear.
no, I've been so blessed to have these wonderful opportunities to work on absolutely amazing projects.
Yeah, well, we're glad you didn't become a pastor. Um, and that might sound weird for some people in the Christian world, but sometimes you see someone that's passionate about God, and the person's like, "Well, you should be a pastor." We need passionate people that love God in every industry. So we're thankful
Absolutely.
that
Yeah,
you followed the leading of the Holy Spirit to continue on your journey in engineering, and obviously have
yeah,
had very many wonderful experiences and just helping the world do things better.
absolutely. And he's confirmed it so many times through my career, where I've wondered about these things and, sometimes ended up in a management corner and then realized, no, but what's in my heart is the engineering, is the technical stuff. And that's where I, experienced that peace of being right in the middle of where God wants me. Um, so, yeah, through his grace.
Yeah. No, yes. Once again, thankful that you're doing what you do. We need all these different types of people and the gifts and talents God has bestowed upon them, and them to just steward it with his grace. The Now you alluded to it, and this is going to be the crux of the conversation, like you said, with the electric vehicle, which you can talk more about, like what its name is and all that. But the book, which you can find on Amazon, I believe can anybody in the world order that and get it shipped? It is on Amazon, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it's available on Amazon.com. So definitely available in the United States and the UK, but I've had friends from across the world order it. It's yeah, and it's available in South Africa as a printed copy locally. That I printed rather than on Amazon, because Amazon doesn't do printing in South Africa.
Okay.
So if there are any South African listeners, they probably would prefer to purchase it on my website, which is
Right.
called julebook.co.za.
The Joule
But
book.
otherwise,
Yeah.
yes, julebook.co.za. Otherwise, Amazon is the place to go.
Right. And um, yeah, so we'll definitely make sure that link is available. If you're watching this on the replay, you can click directly over to it. And the name of the book is Hope Arising, and there's a subtitle which you can and give. Which so it's an interesting thing to talk about hope arising when we're talking about, hey, this is a electric car, project that didn't quite go where we thought it would. So talk to us about that. Like, how did you come on that name? Because I some from other conversations that we've had, I think some people would not define the experience as a hopeful thing, but you have a different perspective.
Yeah, it's got several dimensions to it. Um, Having gone through what was really a tough process, it was easy for me to end up with, bitterness, and I had to go through quite a significant amount of forgiveness um, in writing the book, but also in leading up to that, just in my walk with God, and that hope was born in me, I guess, in the first instance. But South Africa is a challenging country with many different challenges to it. When after the apartheid era, where the white population voluntarily basically said, "This is wrong. We can't carry on like this," and they voted to basically go to a full and fair election that includes all the population groups. The ANC came into power. Of Nelson Mandela, along with F.W. de Klerk, who was the outgoing president, and they both won Nobel Peace Prizes. And the country was on a very good journey. At that point, it would have very easily collapsed into a civil war. And as I write in the book, people prayed across all boundaries. People actually got together in stadiums and really just prayed for the country. And there was such a miracle from God that, led the country through that stormy period. And economically, it was growing wonderfully, things going well. For several years, after Nelson Mandela stepped back as president, Thabo Mbeki came in. And it was sort of in his era, that we started this project. And it was aimed at really creating a lot more employment. The unemployment is a major issue in South Africa. At that stage, it was around about 20%. At the moment, it's over 30%. But at that stage, it was declining. Everything was, economically was going in the right direction. And that's the one dimension of the hope, is creating an expectation for those that are in that hopeless condition, creating employment through developing a completely new industry. So South Africa is, has a reasonably strong motor manufacturing industry, but no local R&D, no local brands. And we saw that the change in the energy landscape, the need for renewable energy sources and whatever, was creating an opportunity for mobility. And then we jumped into that as the opportunity to actually create a new industry, which would then trigger a great deal more employment and economic growth for South Africa. So that's the one dimension of the hope. But, even after the book has failed, I really believe that's still a possibility, not for electric vehicles anymore, but the engineering capability is there. The South Africa being located on the southern tip of Africa and understanding the African context better than, the rest of the Western world does, in terms of creating products suitable for Africa. I really believe there's a wonderful opportunity to still provide, products for Africa and help reindustrialize Africa. But then, there's also the hope of God in this, where, I do make the point in the book that, I believe God has a plan for South Africa. It's got a significant Christian population. But despite that, it's one of the most crime-ridden countries in the world, because, all it takes for evil to thrive is good men to do nothing, and there's a lot of that, I think, unfortunately. And so really to call out that hope and that expectation and obedience to God and his ways, is the other thing which I'm hoping to trigger through the book.
Yes. It makes me think of Hebrews 11. You talk about the heroes of faith, right? And over again, it talks about how they died without seeing the promise. Not that we're hoping that for you, obviously, but the idea that they were working on something much larger themselves, the kingdom of God. And, through their process, they were faithful to what they were called to do. And so, obviously, in this story, Gerhard, it might be something that you started that a next generation takes and goes much further. You just never know. So we thank
Absolutely.
for what
And
you've
I'm
done
completely
already.
at peace with that. It really, it took, as I say, God's work, but I mean, people reading the book, I get a lot of, very nice feedback from people reading the book, people that were involved, but also it was in the media a lot. So people were really cheering us along, in the country. And so when it came to a standstill, people were very disappointed, and people getting closure out of reading the book and knowing what really happened.
Hmm.
And just to see, yes, that it was something worthwhile to do, and it was definitely worthwhile to write the book and get the story out there.
Definitely. So the name of the car was the Joule, and it's not the jewel like you would wear on a, necklace or something. It was named after a specific scientist, right?
Yeah, so Joule is the also the unit of energy, which was named after the scientist. So it actually was a very clever name that our marketing team came up with, and like Tesla as well, which is also a very electric centric term. And yeah, so it's also when we took the car to the Paris Automotive Show to display it to the world for the first time, some of the media actually played with words, and called it the jewel of the Paris Automotive Show, or the crown jewel.
Mm.
So it had that side of it as well. Um,
Yeah. What time frame was this? When did you start working on it? And of course, there was I guess, a prototype, if that's the right terminology that you guys were using,
yeah,
that was at car shows. When
yes,
was
yes.
that?
So we started in 2004 while we were still constructing the SALT telescope. And that took us to many places in the world. But when we started discussing the idea, we realized that the thing that makes electric vehicles possible is battery technology. So um, we first sort of scratched some of our pocket money together and traveled to an automotive show in France where they were displaying, what the state of art electric vehicle technology was like at that time. And then later, a colleague and I went to China, and we visited Chinese battery manufacturers, and we were just astounded at um, the level of technology and how far they had commercialized it. And actually, I mean, we drove in electric buses, and this was in 2005 that we saw electric buses and electric taxis in China. And we realized then that the biggest part of the automotive industry is fast asleep and not expecting this. At the automotive shows, they were all downplaying electric vehicles, saying no, never happen. They're just not good enough. Batteries are not good enough. And that's when we saw that there was definitely an opportunity for a new player and novices at that, on the southern tip of Africa, to actually come in and do something big, obviously with the right partners and the right support, but that, we really could pull this off. So we started officially, we went to the government. There was a government department that provided technology startup funding, and we got 15 million rand, which is about $1 million in today's money. And that took us to the first prototype. And the first prototype, we basically had two parts to the prototype. We had planned to go through 3 iterations of prototyping before we actually went into manufacturing. But in that very first prototype, we had a platform prototype, which was really to demonstrate and test the technologies. So we wanted to develop a car from the ground up. We didn't want to just retrofit an existing car, because we realized that with battery technology and electric motors, the constraints around designing a car are actually very different. You don't have this hot, noisy thing that you need to take care of all the time and keep away from people. And instead, you've got this big, heavy battery, which perhaps you want to swap, because at that stage, it was still not clear whether the world was going to go towards battery swapping or battery charging. And so we wanted the battery as low as possible because it's big and heavy, and it improves your handling if that mass is low. And, with an electric motor, it's a lot smaller, it's not noisy, you can change the aspect ratio of the car and the way it's laid out. And so we had a platform with all our electric vehicle technologies in it. And then people say it's serendipity, I say it's God's provision, but we partnered with a guy called Keith Halford, who was the chief designer for Jaguar previously. and he had retired, but he was an ex-South African, and he was still had some property in Cape Town. So his lawyer pointed us to him and got us to meet up. And he agreed to come on board as our designer. So he did the styling of the car, and suddenly it didn't look like an amateurish effort anymore. It looked like a real car.
Mm.
And that was a major breakthrough for us. And so, yeah, the next step was, to also in parallel with that, build the brand, to start, understanding the market, understanding who would actually buy such a car, and changing our requirements accordingly. And then in 2009, towards the end of 2009, we were at a point where we realized, okay, now we need to start telling the public about this and start building awareness, because people aren't going to just buy a car with a completely unknown brand. So we had a marketing manager who, came from BMW, very experienced lady. And so she helped us develop our brand. And we then took we had the public launch for the first time of the car to the public in South Africa. And the then Minister of Science and Technology, who'd their department had been funding us up to that point, he basically unveiled the car to the media, and we did this in Cape Town. And then 2 weeks later, we were at the Paris Automotive Show, and we were absolutely blown away by the reception. And we were in one of the main automotive halls. We didn't go to the one with the funny little electric cars, because we decided this is a mainstream car. This isn't supposed to be, a funny little car.
Mm.
And we were approached by many of the automotive company engineers that had been there, and they were jealous of us because, the automotive companies weren't really doing that level of R&D. Anyway, so shall I just carry on with the story?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a fascinating in and of itself. The thing that I thought about it, we talked before, and just the whole story of this South African group of engineers and folks come together to work on Joule. Then you have Tesla, who is probably the most widely known electric car company in the world. Once again, the guy that founded it is from South Africa. So I'm like, it's very, I don't think it's a coincidence, right? And so when I see these things as a believer, I'm like, what is God doing with electric cars and South Africa, which doesn't seem like a likely place, right? Out of all the places that could, be the first or the best or whatever you want to call it in a certain arena, you wouldn't say, oh, South Africa is the place where all the electric cars are going to eventually, whatever, you know, like for you guys kind of being ahead of the curve and then eventually Tesla really leading the way, but once again, from a South African leading it. What are your kind of feelings and thoughts behind all of that? And have you kind of, leaned into that and maybe asked the Lord about what's going on with those connections?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there may be two sides to that. I think spiritually, there have been many prophecies and things spoken about, South Africa being the point from which fire will spread over the whole of Africa, going northwards spiritually. And, my forefathers went to South Africa to be missionaries. I mean, they didn't act as missionaries, but they went there to bring the gospel. My earliest forefather that came from Holland and landed there in 1655 or 85. I can't remember exactly. And he was basically a hospital chaplain. And many people fled there to get away from persecution at that stage in France and other countries in Europe. And so South Africa has always been quite a religious country. And, there's a significant, Bible-believing population. And I think that is the root for God's blessing, is when a nation seeks God. Now, in our case, I think, unfortunately, it's for many years, it's not been as a nation, but there really is such a significant number of Christian people that are serving God wholeheartedly, that I think that has an impact. But spiritually, I think God honors what he's been doing there, and there's a fruit that comes from that. And part of that fruit, I think, is clarity, is understanding, is supernatural wisdom, perhaps, words of knowledge, and the things flow from that. The second thing is perhaps there's a pioneering spirit which is perhaps difficult for the Western first world countries, to understand, what there still is in South Africa. I mean, there are places in South Africa where there's no mobile phone signal, and it's really, really remote. I mean, yes, I know in the United States as well, but having grown up in Zimbabwe, when my father settled there, it was virgin bush, and after the Second World War, he bought this fairly significant, 8,500 acres of land. But there was nothing. He lived under the trees until he managed to build himself a mud hut, and then, developed the farm from that point forward. And so even in South Africa today, as an engineer, you get trained in multiple things. It's not a narrow discipline. It's actually a very broad discipline. And so you also get trained to think. You're not just trained in knowledge and, in understanding and narrow things. So a lot of my work today is, I say to people, I connect the dots. And so I need to be able to stand back and see different technical perspectives, different parts of the work, even link that to finance and to whatever. And I thank God for the opportunities I've had in my life to dabble in so many different things. And some people may say, jack of all trades, master of none, maybe. But it's, people easily over-specialize when there's a nice, stable society. The government will take care of you. It's not the mother, the necessity being the mother of all invention. In Africa, if you don't do these things, if you don't fight, and you don't, really, money is scarce, so you have to do these things to survive. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
I just feel like it's a fascinating thing to think about and even pray into. As of course, I've been able to connect with multiple South Africans. Of course, we have a mutual friend, Brett Johnson, that that's how we connected. And there's just an understanding that God does have purpose, not just for us individually, but for nations and peoples and ethnos, this Bible brings about, right? And so there's different things that we carry as nationalities, and this is one of those things that I think God, in His wisdom, and obviously some of the things that you described, makes way for that, and us just to pray into it, like, God, let your purposes really flow forth out of South Africa. And obviously there's this thing about electronic powered movement on somehow, and I know there's like a parallel in the spirit too, right? And that's kind of how things work sometimes with God. There's a natural thing that comes out, but there is a spiritual gifting and authority that's also there.
Yeah.
So that the last part you kind of gave us to, you were kind of at the car show piece of the story, and so that it seems like, wow, things are really moving and shaking. People are loving what's going on, and then what happens after that?
So we had always planned that we don't want to rely on government as a business partner, in this process. But from day one, they said this can be big, and we actually want to take shareholding in the company. And so we were, unfortunately, had the government as a shareholder in a private company. But we had been pursuing private funding. So at that point in time, we had worked closely with a consortium of French banks that had said to us, we will fund you. And then the big financial crash happened. And they said to us, sorry, a week ago we had a lot of money. Now we don't have anything.
Wow.
And when we returned to South Africa, our so-called Industrial Development Corporation, which is an industrial development bank that is government owned, but it's there to stimulate industry. They said they wanted to invest in us and would provide funding. And so we went into the next phase, and the next phase was developing a proper prototype where we basically combined the internal technologies and the shell to make a real car for the first time. And we were training up engineers at the time because there were only a handful of people from the automotive industry that we employed. And few of them had any R&D related experience. So, we had people from the aircraft industry and from the missile industry and, other sort of young engineers, joining our company. And then we started a process of really redeveloping our business plan to understand what it would take to be a success in the market and to really achieve our goals. And we realized that to be cost competitive in our manufacturing, we would have to make at least 50,000 cars per year, which is way more than the South African market would be able to absorb. So we then said, okay, well, Europe is going to have to be our primary target. At that stage, there were significant electric vehicles incentives being paid in Europe already, and a lot of charging infrastructure going up. And so we started gearing the whole vehicle towards the European, and in particular the UK market, and then developing our business plan and our whole engineering planning around getting the car ready to make 50,000 a year. And the thing that brings the cost down is the way you make the car, obviously. So, your prototypes you build by hand. They will cost you, $1 million a piece, maybe, to make. Maybe not quite as much as that, but it's a lot. And then you spend a lot of time and money to develop the tooling and the every single little parts factory that is required to manufacture it, and all the quality processes and the procurement and all of that, so that you can then assemble each car in, I think, it's one every, let me rather not try and quote the number, but it's very frequently, that you actually have to have a car running out the door. And that process was going to cost us several billion rand. So you probably, that engineering and putting up the factories and all of that. So that's probably about $500 million we're talking about, which was less than what Tesla was spending at the time, to get as far as what we were planning to get, and was about the same amount that the South African government was paying in subsidies per year to the automotive industry to get them to stay there and manufacture cars in South Africa. So we felt, it's not a bad number. And we then started looking for potential funders globally. And we worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG and others to do a proper due diligence, help us with the development planning, but then also to be the transaction advisors to get that level of funding. And we signed a deal with two companies that would work together to do the transaction funding. And they told us within a year, they felt the project was, bankable enough that within a year they would get, the required funding that we were talking about. So then we started with the third level of prototypes, where we said to get to this point where we can make so many cars, we need, 4 or 5 years. And in this time, we need to do something in the market. So we decided we were going to make sellable prototypes that we would sell at a premium, but there was a big demand for people that wanted, companies especially, that wanted to have green credentials, and that wanted to come on board, and early adopters, that were really keen on the technology. So we worked onto the third generational prototype, which would be representative of what the car would really look like. So it had a lot of real engineering and very attractive. And I'll share some photos with you that you can also maybe put into the presentation if you like. And in that time, there were a couple of things that started going wrong. And I think the root cause relates to the change of the president of the country, which I referred to earlier. We ended up with a president that has been shown to be very, very corrupt. And subsequently, he's been replaced. But if you look at the economic graphs, if you look at the unemployment graph, if you look at everything at that point, in 2009, things just changed. And one of the things that changed was the IDC that had just started funding us. They said to us, sorry, you're not allowed to take other funding. We will fund you and we will make this work, but you're not allowed to take any other funding. And then they slowly challenged us and they said to us, no, but this is just too ambitious. You can't actually do this. It's too complicated. Why don't you just convert existing cars to electric or whatever, which is a completely different ball game and won't have the transformational power of what we were trying to do.
Right.
And as it happens, the Minister of Science and Technology and his department were very supportive to us through this whole process, but their funding had a cap, what they could provide, and we now had to be funded through a different department of government, through this IDC on the one hand, but also they said as a condition for them to carry on investing, they want the government to actually invest directly into the company as well, more than they already had put in. So Science and Technology said, sorry, we can't do more than this. You have to go to Trade and Industry. Trade and Industry says, yes, fantastic opportunity, let's do this. But they'd never funded anything with any R&D associated with it in their lives. And so they were so frightened by the risk. I believe that was sort of one of the reasons. There may be others. And that they, it stifled their action. And with the fact that the IDC had already said, no, we're not taking any foreign funding, we didn't have any other options. And we ran out of runway and had to close the company. So in that, we finished the prototypes, the third generation prototypes. We had 4 of them on the road. We were road tested by Car Magazine, which is sort of the biggest automotive media outlet in South Africa. And they said, car's good. What next? We'd also taken the car to the Geneva Automotive Show in the meantime. Also very good reception. We had, I think in terms of technically and marketing wise, done an excellent job. There was definitely a growing demand, but our own shareholders had dropped the ball. But within that, there were a lot of bad things that happened. Personally, there are individual stories. There may be 1 or 2 that I can share, but many of them I would prefer not to share.
Sure,
because, you don't, I don't want to celebrate what the enemy was up to, but there was a lot of destruction.
Yeah.
Unnecessary destruction that happened in the process.
Yeah. And, we started out talking about the name of the book is Hope Arising. And you said there was a significant amount of forgiveness and just, heart work, what I would say, that needed to happen in order for this to to be able to be communicated in the way that it has. So can you kind of delve into that a little bit as far as like
Yeah.
what did that look like for you to kind of settle up with the Lord and like, hey, look how far we got, and then you feel like, we've all been there where we've worked on a project or something, you really feel
Mm.
like this is it, and then it's not it. So what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was an entire journey, through the whole period, actually, where, when we started, um, I had to ask God, is this the right thing, obviously? And are these the right partners? We were four that, co-founders of the company. And, should I really partner with these guys? Um, and God said, yeah, that's fine. Um, and there were some tensions that built up amongst us in the way, but that was all manageable. And I mean, often companies, startups go wrong at that level. Um, and God had to work in my heart in the journey there because I don't know if, to what extent they were believers, but from my perception, I was a lot better than them. And God spoke to me through James, where he speaks about wisdom, and he says this type of wisdom is demonic. You and he speaks about just the love and the unity, and yeah, God had some hard words with me. He also gave me from Proverbs, just that verse saying, "Lean not on your own understanding." And that came about at one of the board meetings that we had, where it was really challenging to um, work with these people that were representatives of our shareholders that really struggled to grasp the vision of the company and kept on wanting to steer us in a different direction, even though they had joined the company as shareholders with the company's vision very clearly spelled out, and where we were going with this, and they'd bought into the vision. Um, and it's very easy to want to take control of situations, to especially when you start getting a bit fearful. And God gave me that verse, just be not on your own understanding. And he was faithful, in many of those cases. And that allowed me to sometimes just step away from those conflicting situations and trust him. And there's just so many instances in the book. I quote a few of them, and I do provide some detail. The one part of the journey which was particularly tough, which maybe I can share, um, was that we were accused of actually wasteful spending by the government shareholder. And the government departments have a particular financial policy. In South Africa, it's called the PFMA, Public Finance Management Act. And the leadership of the government organized agency that was providing the funding changed, and they decided they wanted to do a clean sweep, and they did an audit of all the major projects, and they sent auditors to audit us. And normal process would be, that the draft audit report gets discussed with management, and if there are any mistakes or whatever, it gets corrected, and then the audit report gets submitted. But the first we heard of this was after this draft report had already been circulated to the senior management of both the government department and the IDC. And that said, we were wasting a lot of money, and, not exorbitant spending on our company credit cards and all that sort of thing. And we just realized, this is, if this ends up in the media, firstly, you will be tried by public opinion, and of course, people will immediately just cancel you regardless of what the truth is. And we were basically, as founders, three of us. The one founder had resigned at somewhere along the journey, but the three of us that were remaining were all accused, plus some of our other senior management. And the whole process was completely flawed. It was very clear that this was a witch hunt. And it was part of an attempt to get us to let go of the company. And so there are lots of ways you can speculate about what the motives really were and what the government wanted to do with that. I mentioned one or two thoughts in the book, which I don't want to go into now, but that, was extremely hurtful. When your integrity gets questioned, and the way it was handled, it was a 9-month period where we went through disciplinary hearings. And at the very end, when I had to appear before an arbiter that would, make the judgment, he said, and in my case, perhaps I should expand a little bit. I was accused of not giving receipts for the credit card payments I had made in one particular month. What had happened is my PA had not submitted it to our finance department in time for the financial end of the year, but it had been submitted the following month. And when the auditors came, they asked me about it, and I told them that is what happened. But that was taken up into this audit report, and I was told, no, but I have to pay back this money. And it's obviously just an administrative error. But also, then goes through this whole disciplinary process. And so at this very last step, the guy that was doing the final judgment said to me, but if you can produce these papers, then, we will drop all the charges. And so I took the papers out that I had submitted umpteen times to our, and said, yeah, they are. And said, okay, we will drop the charges against you now. And so along with that, there'd been on our board, particular individuals that had really used this opportunity to have a good go at you, and whatever. So it's that level of thing that I had to process with God. And in one of those situations, God just spoke to me out, from Joshua, where the angel says to him, be strong and courageous. Or maybe it was Gideon, I can't remember which. And just to make sure I got the message, we had a daily prayer meeting at the church, and that's, there that I felt God speaking to me about that. But later in the day, I got an SMS from a friend of mine with the same verse. And that was the day ahead of a very challenging board meeting that we would have, where some of the stuff would be discussed. So I can just praise God for his goodness in allowing me to release those things. It's very freeing when you do that. And, being able to even today encounter those people and not feel any resentment, and to just celebrate what God has done and is still doing, in this journey.
Yeah. Well, this is just an inspiring and challenging story to hear. Obviously, like as you hear the good news of what happened, and then you're like, oh man, it didn't actually get there. But like you've gotten there already. God has purposes beyond what we see, and he can use all those things. Like the verse says, like he works all things good for those that love and are called according to his purpose. So we can rest assured in those moments. But obviously, this book has come out, and it's I know you've begun to gather other engineers around that have, a little bit of interest in what you're doing. And can you kind of tell us a little bit about that? And if there's a way for people to get involved, let them know.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I guess, maybe the third dimension of hope arising, is that it's still going into the future. And I mean, I've seen in South Africa many engineers losing hope. There's there are many political challenges in South Africa. There's um, many of the sort of really big, complex technical projects have uh, been cancelled, or just no new ones. So if you're an engineer used to doing big things in South Africa, it's really hard to find a job today. So many people are just moving offshore, and going somewhere else in the world. Um, and South Africa has sort of become more and more technology consumer rather than an innovative country. And so the book is largely directed towards them to reawaken that hope and that expectation, and maybe ignite a few things. I really believe the government policy around investing and stimulating startups and entrepreneurship. I think there's some things that need to change there. So it's talk about that in the lessons learned chapter of the book. Also, the way people invest money and how it's spent. But for the engineers themselves, I think the way that we approach this with a so-called systems engineering approach, where you can take a big complex development like an aircraft or a car and actually still do these complex things and not resort to doing just simple things, I think that is key. And those, because these complex things have so much more manufacturing, so much more value chain that can create, economy. So in the book, I have a QR code inviting people to join a monthly discussion group that I have. At the moment, it's monthly. It may become more frequent. At the moment, we're a handful of people that actually do get together and talk about these topics, and share our lessons learned with each other and encourage one another. And I really look forward to see where that goes, and hoping that somehow I can still contribute, even though I'm sitting in the UK, I can still contribute to what I believe is God's dream also for South Africa in this way.
100%. Well, I want to make sure people get a hold of this book, even if you're not an engineer or you already, if you're listening to this, you've heard the story, there's just, it's a great thing to be aware of. I want to go ahead and you can go on, Amazon, obviously, and find this book. And so I'm just going to share real quick while we're all here together. And as you can see here, we got Hope Arising, the story of South Africa's Joule electric vehicle and why it still matters. And so, Gerhard, you were just talking about the conversations you're having with those in your community and those that are welcome to join, right? Get the book,
Yeah,
and there's a
absolutely.
QR code. And once you're inside the book, you'll be able to see that and you can join up.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yes.
So I can maybe just mention, we didn't try and do it alone in South Africa. We had many global partners. So, we worked with a company, a US company that helped us with electric motors for our prototypes, and then a lot of our body engineering and safety engineering. We were working with other major European companies, and so I think the global perspective is a valid one. Really think there are lessons outside South Africa for this as well, which people will find interesting.
Yeah, so no matter where you're at, go check out that book on Amazon. Like I said, the link will be in the description when you see this on the replay. Gerhard, I wanted to give you the kind of final word. What would be something you'd like to leave the people with as an encouragement today?
Yeah, I think when you press in close to God and you really hear His heartbeat, and you're in that close daily relationship, and the living water is flowing, I think part of that is creativity, and part of that is being able to do things that slay the giants, as Brett would teach us, um, and don't allow a ceiling that's lower than what God is one intending. God's provision is way beyond what we could imagine, and He does carry us through even these very tough, challenging things. and I can just testify to his goodness. And looking back, there are a few things I would maybe do differently, but I would do it again, despite the challenges, because I've just learned so much. It's definitely been worthwhile. Um,
Yes, thank you so much, Gerhard, for being with us today on the 2000 Cubit Rule, for sharing your story. Go get the book, folks. And until next time, we'll see you on the 2000 Cubit Rule.